Welcome to the Sunrise Project podcast. We are here today with Rabbi Russell, and I'm so thankful that you got to join us today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We have this podcast as a part of the Grants Pass Remembrance project, which is a truth and reconciliation project in our community around our history as a Sundown Town. And this podcast is really an opportunity to get to hear from our neighbors, to get to hear about our own individual process as we engage in this process, this story of our community, learning from each other, being together, and getting to be in process together, it's been an honor to get to be a part of this, and it's an honor to get to have you here and to get to join in with it with you in this way.
It's an honor to be here. Mm-hmm. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. So, Rabbi Russ, would you start us out with sharing where might we find you out and about in our community?
You'd find me all over the place, actually. But I am a newer member of the community. So I actually came down from the city of Portland, where I spent most of my life up there, and came down here about 5 years ago. And so my wife and I bought a home out by Merlin, which is a little bit north of Grants Pass, as you know. And so you'll find us out there. We have about 5 acres out there. And then I also founded here in Grants Pass the Center for Human Equality. Mm-hmm. And so that's another place that I try to spend some time. You'll find me, as we mentioned before, at the Weekend Beer Company. Yeah. where you and I met.
Yes.
So I go there, and the brewing theology, which I find is very interesting. Brewing theology, even though it's based on Christian theology, as a Jewish rabbi, I really enjoy going to those things. And Tom has been very gracious about inviting me to them. And so it provides probably maybe a little bit different dimension or perspective at those places. And then quite a few of we frequent quite a few of the restaurants in here in downtown Grants Pass, and getting to know the community somewhat. So you'll find me here and there around town.
Yeah. Well, even though 5 years is that's a chunk of time. Welcome, and we're so glad that you're here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the question that we ask everybody on our podcast, I'd love to get to hear from you. Why does race matter to you?
Well, that's a good question, and I would say that race doesn't matter very much to me. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is because I really don't think it depending on how you interpret what you mean by race as well. Mm-hmm. And so race to me often is associated, for example, with skin color. It can be associated with other things. In Nazi Germany, the Nazis felt that the Jewish people were a different race. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of different ways you can think about race. It's not just skin color. It can be other kinds of features. It can be culturally different, those kind of things. For me, race doesn't seem to matter very much because I don't think race says very much about race itself, that particular identity marker, you might call it. I think what every human being is, first of all, we're all Homo sapiens. So being that we're all Homo sapiens, that's 100% of us, that means that we're all human beings. And so from being human beings, the differentiation of appearance of a human being, for example, whether or not they have light skin or dark skin, whether or not they have blonde hair or brunette hair or darker hair, whether or not they have blue eyes or green eyes or brown eyes, all those kind of surface, whether or not they're slender or overweight, or all those kind of surface exterior appearances that different human beings have, really, in my mind, don't have much value when it comes to who they are as a human being. Because for me, who you are as a human being is is more along the line of what Martin Luther King said when he said, "Don't judge my children by the color of their skin, judge them by their character." And so character is that individual part of each one of us. Character is what defines every human being, in my opinion. Dr. Viktor Frankl once said that there are only two kinds of human beings in the world. There are good, kind human beings and unkind human beings. So he differentiated human beings not by skin color and appearance and all those kind of things, but by their character again. He's saying that these are the only real two kinds of human beings that are in the world, either good people or bad people, you might say. So his perspective was also from a character perspective. And so when somebody says, what does race, in the question, and it's a good question, what does race mean to me as it applies to other human beings, or even to myself for that matter, I would say it really doesn't mean very much to me, because I don't think that race, skin color, or physical differences in appearance and those kind of things are really much of a factor when it comes to who you are as a unique human being and who I am as a unique human being. And so I would say to a certain extent, it matters very little.
Yeah.
Now, to racists, for example, for racist people, for people who are racist, race matters a great deal. Race is a huge, huge factor. In fact, it's the one little identity marker out of the hundreds of each identity markers that all of us have, but it's the one that they concentrate on. And it's the one that they say, that particular thing, that attribute, that skin color, or that shape of the nostril, or that hair color, or whatever, is what defines you as a human being. That's the only thing I need to know about you in order to make a judgment about whether you're somebody worthy of being a human being like myself, in my group, for example. And so from a racist perspective, race is everything. I mean, it's the only thing. You only need one thing. You only need to know what color skin they are, and that's it. That's all you need to know. I think that's a perversion of human relations, in the sense that you have made human relations into be one-dimensional, whereas human beings themselves are so complex from a multidimensional perspective. Every human being is. And so you're not trying to really get to know that human being when you concentrate on their skin color, for example. You're simply reducing them down to something which really has very little meaning. And you're turning it into a factor of making them into an other. And by making them into an other, because they don't have the same skin color you do, you're just going to go ahead and say that they must be bad people because they don't have the same color that I do. And that, I don't think that improves human relations at all. Of course, it harms human relations. Yeah. It's something that in the other concept that people who are different than we are has throughout history. And of course, the Holocaust and everything else was also based on the other. It wasn't a skin color thing, but it was based on the other. You're not like us. You're not part of our group. Therefore, there must be something wrong with you. You must be evil or bad or whatever. So I think that for certain people, people who think that race is everything. I mean, race is the most important thing you can know about somebody. I think that's much more harmful than it is helpful.
Yes. Yeah. That's actually what I love about that question, is it's so loose that we get into. I just loved getting to hear you share all of that. And there will be things that I'll ruminate on more. And there's something fun about those kinds of questions that feel loose and you're not quite sure how to interpret them, that gives that freedom. But thank you. Yeah. There was something you talked about in there that reminded me of a conversation that we'd had earlier in reference to our identities being quite mosaic. That's a
Yes.
quote from you. And I wanted to bring that up before we get into, I'm really looking forward to hearing about your human relational philosophy and hearing you talk about that. And we are kind of already talking about it.
Yes.
But let's talk a little bit more on the mosaic of our identities, and that what I'm noticing is that piece, that temptation to interpret or define somebody by one of those identities that is different from yourself,
Right.
and how othering that can, and distancing that can be, and how easy it can be. I'm thinking in particular with our enemies or those that we feel distant to. We are most tempted to define them with only one identity, and that being an identity that is different than ours.
Right. That's a good question. And it is what we're doing when we try to define somebody by a single identity marker, for example, skin color or gender or sexual preferences or whatever, those kind of things. Anytime that we do something like that, we're assigning to them one particular part of their humanity that they might belong to a particular group. And so, for example, the LGBTQ group, for example, if you're a member of that group, that some people will judge you and say they can know everything about you and make a judgment of whether you're a good person or a bad person because of being a member of that particular group. That one single identity marker, whereas LGBTQ people, like all other human beings, have a mosaic of identities. We have all kinds of other identities. So why would you pick just one of our identities and say, I'm going to judge you just based on that one identity alone? Is that really helpful for you to be able to have a relationship, a I-thou relationship rather than a I-it relationship? So when you put people into a group, when you put them into a group, then you fall into this kind of in a sense, you're already starting to dehumanize that individual. You are, for a couple of reasons. One is to say that if we know that every human being has a multiplicity of different identity markers and identity factors, we're a mosaic, we know that about every human being. But when we say we're going to judge that human being by only one group identity thing, then we're saying that in a way they're not really human, because all humans have a multiple amount of identity factors, but when I put them over here and say that they're only based here because of their skin color, that I'm only going to judge them based on their skin color, I'm going to consider them the other based on, there's already a process of dehumanization, but there's also the denial of their unique individuality, which is what ethical individualism talks about, in that the fact that the other kind of absolute, if you want to talk about it from a philosophical perspective, we would talk about it as an axiom. So an axiom is one of those unchallengeable truths, a truth about human beings, that we're all Homo sapiens. That's a truth about human beings. We're all members of the same species. You can't deny that. Nobody can challenge that truth. That's an axiom of human. And it's also a very important axiom of human relations. You build on that axiom because that's a truth that everybody agrees with, right? The other truth about that everybody agrees with is that, and you cannot deny, is that every human being is also unique. Every human being is also unique.
Yeah.
And so if human beings are all unique, then you put them into this group, all of a sudden you're saying that human being in that group is like all the other people in that group, and you're denying their individuality. You're saying that I can say everything I want to say about this person just because of their membership in that group.
Yeah.
That one identity marker. But that term is interesting. I only started talking about that identity marker in this conversation, but I actually like that term. I might use that in the future as well. So. But if we take that, we're already denying their individuality. We're taking, okay, here's a human being with a unique individuality, and now we're putting them in a group and saying, okay, they're just like everybody else in that group. Okay, well, that's denying the fact that human thing that we know to be for every human being. It's denying it and all of a sudden putting them over here in a group, this monolithic group of people who will act alike and think alike and talk alike and have the same kind of background and all the rest of it. I mean, so you will see that this is a lesson of the Holocaust as well. And the Holocaust, sometimes people think about the Holocaust as, well, it's a Jewish experience. And so we have these Yad Vashem, and you have all these different museums that are based on the Holocaust. And the lesson from the Holocaust is not to be nice to Jewish people. I think you should be nice to Jewish people, but that's not the lesson of the Holocaust. The lesson of the Holocaust is don't put people in groups and dehumanize them.
Yeah.
Don't put them in groups and consider that group membership is the only thing that defines that unique human being.
Yeah.
And then from there, once they're in group, part of the thinking process, the conceptual process of racism and some of these other things is it's very simplistic. Makes it easy. You don't have to think very much. I'm not saying only stupid people are racist.
No.
There are very smart people who are racist.
Yeah.
But the whole concept is very simplistic. It's, I'm going to put you in this group, and that's all I need to know about you. I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't have to analyze it anymore. I don't have to think that you have all these multiple dimensions of you as a unique individual. I could just think of you as a black person or a white person or a brown person or a Jew or a Christian or whatever. And that's all I need to know.
Yeah. I'm thinking now of, we were talking earlier about, I'm going to say his name wrong, Occam's razor. Am I saying that right?
Or what?
Occam's razor? Is that what you called it?
Occam's razor.
Occam's razor.
Yeah.
So that idea that any good solution is a simple solution. Well, it's funny to think about how some very bad solutions are also simple.
Right.
And we have this this pull towards simplicity. Let's make it simpler. And in that process, we can do some very damaging things in dehumanizing people. The simplicity of identity markers.
That's a good
and
point.
Forgetting
But
mosaics.
I would say that Occam's razor can also be used for ethical individualism because it makes it even simpler.
Oh yeah, then let's dive into that for a moment.
So not having all different kinds of races and groups and religions and all the other things that other people do that create group hatred, and really what it is group hatred.
Yeah.
Ethical individualism says, hey, everybody's unique. Everybody's unique. That's simple,
That's
everybody's
even simpler.
Unique. And
yes.
as a relational philosophy, as a philosophy of how you should relate to another human being, you should relate to them first knowing that the person across this table from you or whoever you're meeting at whatever time, knowing that person's unique and you can't make any prejudgments about them because you don't know them. Mm-hmm. You don't know them just by looking at them. You could look at somebody and say, okay, you could look at myself, for instance, with this kippah on, and you could say that he's Jewish. So you could, and maybe I am, maybe I'm just dressing up to be Jewish, who knows? Mm-hmm. But you really can't say anything about somebody from their appearance, and this is another reason why race doesn't mean very much to me. If I'm sitting across from somebody, and I did this for most of my career. I did this. I would sit across the table from somebody, and I'd say, I'm kind of tabula rasa. I'm a blank slate. I don't know anything about you. You tell me. You tell me who you are. Yeah. And the reason why you have to tell me who you are is because you're a unique individual, and because that uniqueness of yourself as a human being doesn't come from what you look like. There may be a lot of people who look kind of like you or have similar characteristics, physical characteristics to you, but that's not really who you are as a human being. Mm-hmm. And so when I sit and don't prejudge you, I'm waiting for you to tell me who you are. Mm-hmm. You tell me who you are, all of a sudden I'm connecting to who you really are, the essence. As René Descartes, the French philosopher, said, he said, I think, therefore I am. So René Descartes' meditations, which he wrote about, which is quite interesting, really, but he wanted to go to extreme skepticism. He wanted to deny any of his physical senses, all of his physical senses and everything, and try to find out, how do I know that I exist as a human being? How do I know that I am who I am, that I be who I am to be? You know, how do I know that? And so he threw out all of his physical senses and all the rest of it, and said that he could be deceived, and by his physical senses, you can touch something that's hot and it's actually, or you can touch something that's very, very cold and it actually feels hot. So your senses, your physical senses can deceive you.
Yeah.
And he got to the point where he said, the only way that I know that I exist is because I can ask the question, do I exist? Because therefore, my doubt, do I exist, is the verification of who I am. Well, where does that come from? It doesn't come from what you look like. It comes from inside here. So every human being really is in here, inside here. And that's why physical appearance doesn't really mean very much. It's really what's going on inside here that matters. That's the essence of humanity, the essence of the uniqueness of every human being is what's going on inside their head. Well, inside their head. And of course, we can't get inside somebody else's head. So we can't really know them until they start communicating with us, and they start telling us who they are. So the best way to approach any human being that you don't know, human qua human, is to approach them from the perspective, I'm not going to make any prejudgments about you, whether you're a good person or a bad person or anything else about you, until you start talking to me. So I have to hear from you where you are, which is in here. I have to hear that to be able to make a connection and then to make any kind of judgments whatsoever about who you are as a human being. So that's why group judgments are so harmful, because they totally deny that that's where we come from. They think that we come from, you know, what we look like or what our skin color is, and that's not at all where we come from. We come from inside here. So
we have such a tendency. Well, I was reflecting on our cultural, like where we're at right now in our culture and our tendency to have groups. I think that's probably all of human history. It's and my own self, groups that I've mentioned even in this podcast with, and I think we had I shared a bit about an interaction with someone in the group that identifies as the salt shakers. And, you know, we've got the groups of, you know, Democrat and conservative. We've got the groups of, there's just so many groups that we put people in and do that very thing. I'd love to go like another layer. It's almost deeper, but it's also more concrete in some ways. You've shared some stories of engaging individually with someone that looked very different than you. And I don't know if this is going to bring some things to mind. If not, I can keep going. But and just that process of how you engage so that you're remaining open to what they have and not tempted to do that kind of one-dimensional judging.
Well, you know, before I became a rabbi, I was in I had my own registered investment advisory firm up in Portland, and so I handled investments and finance. So I have I have an MBA, and my background is in finance, and so. But where I got that, and it kind of came through a lot of different things. It kind of became ethical individualism. Was the idea that every time I had a client that sat in front of me, and I worked with clients from all different kinds of groups that you might say, from all different walks of life, all different colors, all different groups, all different sexual preferences, you know, all the rest of it. I mean, everybody. I worked with everybody. Yeah. But as far as those kind of groups are concerned, but when I sat down across the table from somebody, all I wanted to do was I wanted them to tell me, you tell me what's important to you. As I'm not going to say because you're a member of this group that you have, either this deficiency about finance or you don't know much about money or whatever. I'm not going to say based on what group you may be put into that you may not know what I'm talking about. I want you to tell me. You tell me who you are. You tell me what your thoughts are about finance, about what your financial planning should be, what your dream should be, and those kind of things. And I started thinking about that when I became a rabbi and I was going through rabbinical seminary. I was thinking about, that's a very equitable way to treat other human beings, to not make prejudgments about them. And so to speak to your point about groups, you're absolutely right that we group everything. We group everything. We group plastic cups and we group tables and chairs and all kinds of things. Human beings do this. This is how we make sense of life. This is how we make sense of what's going on around us. And we tend to group things. We categorize them and we also judge them as well. So, this is a cheap plastic glass. It's not a real nice glass,
Yeah.
Nice one. So we have this. We do this all the time.
Yeah.
Cars and restaurants and all kinds of things. We make these judgments about all these things. So it's very, very much human nature to do this. What I try to do with ethical individualism is just try to tell people, yes, you can do that with all these other things, all these other objects. You can even do this with animals and different things. You can't do this with human beings. It's not helpful to do this with human beings. And the reason why it's not helpful to do this with human beings is because every human being is unique. So we're going to group human beings. We're going to say, here's Jews, and here's Christians, and here's black people, and here's white people, and here's all these different things. So we're going to group people. What we can't do is assign values to the group. We can't make judgments about the group. We can't say that all Jews are good people and all Christians are bad people, for example. You can't do that. Again, as Dr. Viktor Frankl said, there's no pure groups of people out there. So there are good people and bad people in every group of people. So when we put groups together, we can say that, yes, here's a whole group of people who all identify as one identity marker, that they're Jewish, and here's a whole group of people who identify as one identity marker as Christian. But can I say all Christians are bad people, or all Christians are intolerant, or all Christians are racist, or all Christians are this? We can't do those kind of things. We just simply can't make those kind of judgments. If we're actually trying to be fair and equitable to everybody, we can't do that. Yeah. Now, if we're trying to push a certain agenda of some kind where we want to demonize, the Nazis demonized the Jews, they were certainly pushing an agenda. And there are other groups around the world that have been demonized and then slaughtered because of that demonization, in dehumanization. If we're going to go down that pathway, then then we're going to group people and we're going to judge people. And what I'm trying to tell people with ethical individualism is that's group judgmentalism, racism, anti-Semitism, any of these kind of things are all group judgments. And so these things are, anti-Semitism is a symptom of group judgmentalism. It's not the problem. So racism is a symptom of group judgmentalism. The Holocaust was caused by group judgment. So what is the cancer we're really fighting here? The human relational cancer that we're fighting is not racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, and all these other kinds of problems that people get so caught up in. What we're really fighting is this idea that human beings do very, very often, and that is that we put people in a group and we judge the group. That's what we're fighting. We're fighting group judgmentalism. We're fighting collective judgmentalism. We're assigning collective guilt, for example. Yeah. Collective guilt should never exist. Collective pride should never exist. Those kind of group things are very harmful for human relations because it starts to elevate people. Yes. Our group's better than your group because I'm a member of this group. I'm a better human being than you are. Because with the Nazis, because I'm Aryan, we're better human beings. Therefore, we have the right to murder you and your children. And I mean, out of the 6 million people murdered in the Holocaust, 2 million of them were children. Unfortunately, with big numbers like that, people just kind of deny the individual humanity of each one of those children. But we can get caught up in a child story where there's a couple of children involved, and we can get really caught up in that emotionally. But when somebody says 2 million children were
we just don't
murdered,
know how to...
that's just becomes a statistic. But the truth of the matter is, it just shows you how horrific group judgmentalism can be. And if there's one lesson we can learn from the 20th century, which was the bloodiest human century ever in the history of the world, of humanity, was the 20th. Technologically, what that's telling us is, we have iPhones and all kinds of things. I have an iWatch. You have all these wonderful technological achievements that we can even do this right now. This is incredible stuff.
Yeah.
But as human beings, we are primitive, and we're staying primitive. And if not anything else, I think in American society today, we're sliding backwards. What we're sliding backwards into is tribalism. Tribalism is the idea that we're all groups, and that we have group rights and we have group identities, and we should be judged by our group, not be judged by who we are as unique human beings. And that's harmful. That's the most primitive form of societal development ever in history, in human history, is tribes. Tribes. We start out with tribes. Well, if we want to progress, we truly want to be progressive, we need to move beyond tribes. And I think America, to a certain extent, was an experiment in moving beyond tribes and classes, and trying to emphasize the unique individuality and the individual rights that people have, rather than group rights. Like in Europe, the aristocrats had group rights. But, in America, we wanted to get rid of the classes like that and break it down to individual rights. And so I think that's the right path. And Martin Luther King was absolutely right when he said character instead of skin color. Skin color is a group characteristic, and character is an individual characteristic. So he stayed on that message of individual. And that's what ethical individualism is. It's saying we could even be better this way. We can be better this way. We can keep improving, and we need to keep improving. Even American history we've had too much. And today we have rising anti-Semitism. We have rising problems with race relations, and all those things are based on group judgmentalism. So we're sliding back to that rather than progressing forward. So if we really want to progress forward, we want to improve how we relate to one another as unique individuals. And part of my philosophy, which is a human relational philosophy, is the idea of this is the better approach to improving human relations than sliding back to tribalism. So.
Yeah. I want to share an experience that I had that I shared with you the first time we met. And I'm getting more layers in my processing, even as we're talking now. And so one of the groups, so for me personally, as a Christian, one of the groups that I am very tempted to other and be one-dimensional about is the salt shaker group, the group that holds signs around our community. Because they're a part of my group, I think is partly why it's so hard. And I have definitely done that one-dimensional, that group, those people have been in a process of, gosh, how do I transform how I perceive both this group of people and the individuals that are a part of this group? And I think I'd shared a bit when we first met about an interaction I had with someone that I had talked with that was outside of Newman Methodist when they had their Martin Luther King Jr. gathering. And there was a moment in our talking where I referenced her as being a part of this group that she so clearly to me appeared to be a part of.
Right.
And it was hurtful to her. And she said, I might come out with this group, but I don't agree with everything. And I really appreciate the word dehumanizing that you used, because she felt dehumanized in my reference, which I thought was, I didn't say it in a way that was meaning to be hurtful, but even in that context, that process where it's so important to see the individual. And I had shared a little bit more. I can't remember what it what it was specifically, but I shared a little bit more about in my interaction with her. I think partially my wrestle of, she was talking about love being what brought them out there, and I was having a really hard time, this doesn't feel like love. And in our conversation, you'd said to me, oh, but you can't say that they're not doing that out of love. Mm-hmm. Like that's for them, they might really be doing that out of love. And that's not where the conversation can have any kind of momentum to tell them that they're not doing it out of love. That just really struck me. Is there any way you can continue to talk about that? And how you would engage in a conversation, maybe pick up the conversation that I was having, and where you would take that in being able to really be with and listen.
Yeah, I've had people that I've run into that are anti-Semites, for example, and so from a human relational perspective, you can't have a relationship with somebody if you just start calling them a bigot and this all kinds of names or whatever, because they're not gonna have a relationship with you. They're gonna get very defensive.
Yes.
They're gonna start calling you names, and so you end up both calling each other names and walking away. So there's no relationship there, right? So to improve human relations, part of the process is, I actually wrote an essay about this, and it's called Ideational Tolerance. And if you read the book Justice by John Rawls or read Karl Popper et al., these are people who believe that we should be very tolerant of other people's ideas, not so much their actions. Actions are different than ideas. And so if I had an anti-Semite talking to me, I could either get very defensive and say, you're a bigot, you're a hater, I don't want anything to do with you, you're just a really bad person. Mm-hmm. First of all, you have to say that because somebody has a wrong idea, a wrong thinking, according to you it's a wrong thinking, that makes them overall a bad person, and that's not true. People can, for instance, be a racist and still be a good person. Mm-hmm. They can. Mm-hmm. I don't think that one thought itself is enough to make somebody into an evil person. I don't think anti-Semitism, a person who hates Jews, is not overall holistically a bad person just because they hate Jews. So if I had an anti-Semite in front of me and we were talking and they said, I hate Jews, and I say, well, why? I mean, what happened? Tell me your story. Maybe you were raised that way. Maybe you had a Jewish person that did something really bad to you, or maybe you read some books by some anti-Semites, Mein Kampf by Hitler, whatever it was, and you were convinced that there was some merit to that kind of thinking. So tell me about that. I want to have a conversation with that person. I can't have a conversation with that person if I'm intolerant of that person, if I'm just going to call them a name and walk away. So I need to engage with that person and understand that I want to understand where they're coming from. And a perfect classic example of this is that sign, the people that used to hold the signs up at the when the military members were being buried, and they would hold up these really bad, terrible signs about all kinds of things. Anyway, I won't mention what they were saying, but but there was a daughter who was raised in that family, and she was with, I forget the name of the group, but she was with them, and they were doing really terrible, hateful type things, all in the name of religion. And there was a Jewish journalist who was down there and started talking to the daughter and trying to find out, why are you saying all these terrible? Because they were anti-Jews and they were people with different sexual orientations and all the rest of it. So they were just kind of a hate group. And so he asked her, started to have a conversation with her. She actually ended up converting to Judaism and marrying the journalist. So it shows you can't have a relationship with somebody if you're just going to call them a bigot and walk away.
And the power of why. The power of asking why. I'm listening.
But that's ideational tolerance. Now, ideational tolerance does draw the line.
Mm-hmm.
It draws a line, and John Rawls and Karl Popper and other thinkers have also done this at the point of action. So when you know, if you're going to hurt somebody, physically hurt somebody, or beat somebody up, or harm somebody physically, because they're not in your group, or you think of them as a hateful other or whatever. No, you don't tolerate that at all. You don't tolerate physical violence against people that are not in your group for that reason. People who are hateful towards you in ideas, or like a person that says, "I hate Jews." There's the potential there to have a relationship with that person. There's a potential there to understand where they're coming from, and so from that perspective, yes, you do have tolerance. And again, both the thinkers that I described, both of them consider that you can tolerate up to a point, and then up to a point when they're actually taking physical action against you, throwing you into concentration camps and those kind of things. Of course, you don't tolerate that any longer. So, but ideational tolerance is very important. In America today, we have the political polarization, and the reason why we have such polarization on politics in America is because we don't have ideational tolerance. You don't. People are not willing to listen to somebody else who has an opposing viewpoint. Respect the fact that they have the right to have an opposing viewpoint, and then try to understand where they're coming from. And the other part of ideational tolerance is a little bit of intellectual humility that says, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know everything. Yeah. And we don't. No human being knows everything. No human being has all truth. And if we recognize that should give all of us a little bit of a pause to say, wait a second, I don't know everything. How do I know that person's wrong? How do I know for sure that person's wrong? Because I don't know everything.
Yeah.
I don't know everything there is to know about politics, for example.
Yeah.
So how do I know that the person who has a different political opinion than I do, how do I know that they're wrong?
Yeah.
I don't really know that for sure. I can't say that my truth is an objective truth that applies to everybody. Because if you can apply your objective truth to everybody, then you're God in a sense, because you're perfect,
Yeah.
And I don't know any human beings that are like that. So I think we all should step back a little bit and say, hey, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
I have what I think are the answers. So I think with the political polarization in America today, I think we ought to really step back from the brink and start realizing that we don't have all the answers, and to be a lot more tolerant of other people's ideas and thoughts and positions. Yeah. Because they may have some good points in there. I mean, there may be some facts that we're not aware of or whatever. So
that's the piece that tends to drive the way that I think about it is not so much the right or wrong, like I might not know it, I might not be right, but that idea of like, there is so much that I have to learn, and there's so much that I can learn from you, no matter what disagreeing, no matter where we're at in the process or in the positions or in whatever we believe, there's just this reality of, I can learn so much from you right where we're at.
I think the sign of a really highly educated person is a person who has intellectual humility. Because my experience in my education, I have 4 degrees. The more that I learned, the more I knew I didn't know everything. Yeah. I mean, really, truly.
No, No,
the more you learn
I really
about
hear you.
everything,
I truly hear you.
and then I didn't pass all my exams with 100%. I got some things wrong, which means I didn't really know everything about that either.
And even if you had, there would
So
be other
that
things
intellectual
you wouldn't
humility,
know.
I think, is I think a person that's highly educated. Socrates says, "I don't know anything." I mean, I know that I don't know in a way. And yet, then he turns around and says, "Know thyself," which is another interesting comment. But his one thing that he knew about himself was, "I don't know anything."
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of intellectual humility is, I think, important for us to, and it helps with ideational tolerance.
Yeah.
Because if we truly believe that we don't know everything, we don't have the answers and the truth. And truth is very difficult. Truth is very difficult. Objective truth is very difficult to find.
Yeah.
And the philosophers will tell you that the highest aspiration of humankind is to discover truth. Why? Because it's so difficult to do. So a lot of people walking around thinking that they have all truth about everything or all truth about even particular subjects.
Yeah.
I think they need to come down off their soapbox or whatever and start saying, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And so I need to listen to the other side. I need to listen to everybody else. I can learn about other things like you were mentioning. There's always something more I can learn. And so I think really that intellectual humility is a very positive sign for all of us because none of us has all truth.
Yeah.
And that's just a fact.
Yeah. I'm really struck too by in you talking about the ideational tolerance, that moment of we all have a right to our opinion.
Yes.
But you said it a little bit differently, but just that there is a way in which if we say that, like, you can't think that, there's a way in which we're saying you don't have the right to think that. And there's, for some reason, that really struck me differently, to think about it as rights.
Well, there's a couple of things you're saying if you say something like that. One of them is he's saying that I know the truth about this, the only truth, for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the truth about this. And you can't think that way because you're wrong. And I know you're wrong because you don't agree with me, you're wrong. And so you're making really, really black and white type statements about knowledge and truth. And, there would be no subject of philosophy if it was all about, philosophy had all the truths about everything.
Yeah.
So they don't, discovery of truth and finding truth. And again, if we look at the 20th century from a human relational perspective, that's the most advanced century that we've had in human history. And we've learned so much more to get to that point. And Germany, of all nations, was one of the most highly educated nations on the planet. Yeah. And gave us great composers and philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche and all the rest of it. And yet Germany also caused the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So you think about, okay, so we've advanced in so many technological and material ways, but we haven't gone very far when it comes to human relations. And so even when I put the term together, human relational philosophy, and I actually Googled it, no one else had put those three words together. And I think it's really fascinating that I couldn't find anybody else writing anywhere on the planet about a human relational philosophy. So that's why I called ethical individualism a human relational philosophy, because I wanted to put those three words together. I want us to think about what the best way that we should, human qua human, have relations with each other and try to dial down all the polarity and all the hate and the intolerance, really the intolerance that we have for each other. Yeah. And we're at this point in time in America, we just don't tolerate people who don't think the way we think.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible place to be from a human relational perspective. It's it's the opposite of where you want to be.
Yeah.
So you want to have a positive human relationship. So that's what ethical individualism is, a positive rather than a negative human relational philosophy. it tries to build on positive terms. It tries to assume the best in somebody else rather than assuming the worst in somebody else. And so, and even from a Jewish perspective, we have a thing which is referred to in Hebrew, it's referred to as Lashon Hara. And Lashon Hara is evil speech. And evil speech is when you're name calling and you're calling other people by bad names.
Yeah.
You know, it's a form of what we refer to as evil speech. And we even think it's potentially equivalent to murder. Even equivalent to murder, to say bad things about other people.
Yeah.
So if you're saying negative things about other people or other groups of people, it's just a very, very harmful thing. You're not going to improve the world. You're not going to make the world better. You're not going to bring people together.
Yeah.
You're going to divide people, and you're going to go down that path of dehumanization, which can lead to very horrific consequences according to all world history.
Yeah. What I find interesting is that we can go down that path of calling people names often for what we think are good reasons. we dehumanize people that, you know, this thing is so good, and these people are pushing against this good thing, and so and then we dehumanize that group and speak evil to them and cause great harm in the context of this what we feel like is a good thing, which I'm just so struck by that. There's a way I want to bring this around with Grants Pass Remembrance. One of the things that we seek to do with this group is that it is a community project, which means that there are people that this is something that we believe people from all different groups can be a part of, can say, yes, that's something that we want, even though they might have something be really different from the person next to them that's saying that same thing. And so there's a way in which just being a part of Grants Pass Remembrance pushes us to seek to say, how can I have conversations with my neighbors that I disagree with? And remembering to say, oh, you believe that thing. Why? Tell me about that. Knowing that not everybody will join in this thing, but that because of the nature of this work, even those people that aren't joining in this thing, we need to leave space for. And that's on us to do. We will not speak evilly of anybody, whether or not you're choosing to join in this healing process for our community's sake. And so there's these layers that I'm just noticing of this is so much of what we want to do in our community.
Yeah.
That connecting.
And I understand that this was also about the sundown laws, and if you look at the sundown laws that they had, and I did when I first came down here, I saw a picture of the KKK marching through the streets of Grants Pass, and I understand that it doesn't apply to everybody in Grants Pass. It doesn't apply to anybody who's even alive today, because I think it happened over 100 years ago. So
that part did.
I'm sure all those people are gone, but But you know, those kind of things, the sundown laws and the KKK march, which was also against Jewish people, those kind of things are group judgmental. They're engaging in group judgmentalism. So the sundown laws were based on group judgmentalism.
Yes. Yep.
You know, you're not worthy if you're a member of this particular group to be in our town after sundown.
Yeah.
So the thing I like about your approach here, the GP Remembrance, is that you call it sunrise. Yes. And what I like about sunrise is the idea that, okay, so let's take that group judgmentalism and that those horrific kind of rules and laws that they had back at that time, that very intolerant of other groups, and let's make it into being tolerant of everybody, you know, and being open to everybody and being inclusive for everybody. And so sunrise to me, I think, works well in that it's not group based. It's, to my mind, it should be individual based. And not only should it include just a few individuals, it includes every individual. And so the approach should be one that is totally inclusive, totally inclusive, which means 100%. Everybody is going to be judged by their unique individuality. It doesn't mean there's not good and bad people in the world. There are good and bad people in the world, but they're not good and bad people based on what group they're in.
Yes.
They're good and bad people based on their own individual character.
Yes.
And so we should, on a sunrise basis, in my opinion, we should approach every one of our neighbors with the attitude of loving our neighbors and getting to know our neighbors and accepting them and accepting their right to have different opinions and ideas.
Yes.
And being able to tolerate everybody. So that's where I think that's where it could be really beneficial, is if we can move in that direction. And unfortunately, I think we're not moving in that direction. So I'd like to see us kind of turn back around and go that way, so that we think of each other as unique individuals rather than groups.
Yes. Rabbi Russell, thank you so much for joining me today and joining us today.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks for having me again. So
yeah.
I enjoyed being here, and it was nice to talk with you about this.
Yeah, thank you. I want to take a minute to thank Trevor, who produces this podcast, and The Hive. The Hive is an awesome space. Come by and check it out. There's also a little coffee shop downstairs. It's a neat space in our community. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you again.
Thank you.